Okay, well, good afternoon and hello, everybody. Firstly, I'll begin by introducing myself. So my name is Robbie, and I'm the Schools and Youth Outreach Officer at Hope for the Future. And I lead basically engagement with young people and teachers all across the UK. So secondly, I'd like to say a huge thank you to everybody who's joining us today. We've had over 100 sign-ups, so we're really looking forward to having as a dynamic event as possible. And it's a pleasure to welcome you to our week of webinars, Seen but Still Not Heard, Voices on the Youth Climate Movement. So yeah, just to give a bit of an overview of who Hope for the Future are. Hope for the Future is a national climate communications charity, and essentially what we do is we work to equip communities and individuals across the country to communicate the urgency of the climate crisis to their elected representatives. And we feel that it's vitally important that elected representatives and constituents have rich and challenging conversations about the climate crisis. And we believe that especially right now that this is very important as we consider how best we build back better and work to ensure that the economic recovery from COVID-19 is aligned with our path towards reaching net zero by 2050, hopefully earlier. And we also believe that local, grassroots democratic engagement is an essential part to achieving this. So this is the fourth instalment of our webinar series, Common Home, Common Ground. And we'd like to thank the European Climate Foundation for funding our events project, which has allowed us to bring this webinar series to you. And I would also like to thank the Orp Foundation and ECF again for supporting our youth and schools outreach work over the past and coming year. So just some housekeeping then before we start. Firstly, this webinar will be being recorded, so it's going to be available on demand to share afterwards. And then we'll be sending all of our attendees a follow-up email at the end of the week, directing you to Hope for the Future's latest resources, more webinars like this, and information on the next steps you can take to get both involved with Hope for the Future's work and wider climate action. So in today's webinar, you can get involved by posting your questions in the Q&A box, which will be just at the bottom of your screen, and then upvoting the questions that you'd like to more see the answers to. And my colleague George will be monitoring these questions and putting them to our panelists later on in the webinar. And I'd really like to encourage as many people as possible to submit questions, just to ensure that this webinar is as rich as possible. And then also, please do follow us on social media, especially Twitter. Our handle is @HopeFTFuture. And use the hashtag HFTF webinar or hashtag Common Home, or even both, it's up to you, just to ensure that the discussions that happen and take place here extend beyond this space alone. So also on your dashboard, you'll see that there's a little chat box. Please use this as a space to introduce yourself and to chat with other webinar attendees during the session. My colleague Emma will be monitoring this and will be on hand with any technical questions or non-discussion sort of related questions that you might have about Hope for the Future. And then finally, at the end of the webinar, a feedback form should pop up in your browser, which please do take the time to fill out. It's only short, it'll take a few minutes, but it will really help with the evaluation of our events programs and ensure that they're the best that we can be. So today then, what we're going to be doing is looking at the impacts of youth climate activism on elected representatives at both the local and national level. We've got about until 3 p.m. today, so we'll start with some speaker introductions, which will then lead us into a fuller discussion with some predetermined questions that we've had submitted, and then this will be followed by an audience Q&A. And each panelist will have about 1 to 2 to 3 minutes sort of time to answer each question. So I'll begin by introducing our brilliant panelists. So firstly, we have Alexander Stafford, the Conservative MP for Rother Valley, who has held this seat since the 2019 general election. We have Alexandra Phillips, but am I right to call you Alex?
Yes, please.
I'll call you Alex in this webinar. And Alex has previously served as the Green Party member of the European Parliament for the South East of England from 2019 to 20. She was formerly the Mayor of Brighton and Hove since May 2019 and the youngest person to hold that office, and remains a councillor for the Regency Ward on Brighton Council and Hove. And then finally, by no means last, we are joined by the brilliant Nadia Whitcomb MP, who was elected in 2019 as the Labour Member of Parliament for Nottingham East, and at 23 is Parliament's youngest MP, which is an absolutely brilliant achievement, and I'm sure many people will find that inspiring on this call. So welcome to each of you, and thank you so much for taking the time out of, I know it must be a very, very busy time for you all, for taking the time to participate in this webinar. So to begin with, I'll ask the pre-sort of determined submitted questions, and then we'll follow that by the audience Q&A, which George will lead. So the way that we'll do it is I'm going to begin with this question, which I'll ask, and then Nadia, if we could go to you first to answer, followed by Alex, and then followed by Alexander, and then we'll just rotate throughout, and I'll make it clear which order we're going to answer him in. So the first question then is, in your time as an elected representative, is climate change something that comes up often, and more specifically, is this an issue that is frequently mentioned by young people? So Nadia, if it's okay, we'll begin with you.
Yes and no. It comes up a fair amount. For example, I'm meeting constituents virtually, of course, tomorrow as part of the Time Is Now campaign. But I find that it comes up in less traditional ways. So it tends to be young people who are more concerned about climate crisis than older constituents. And they also tend to be the people who are less likely to email me. So it will come to me via Instagram, sometimes Twitter, or I attend the youth strikes in Nottingham, and of course it will always come up there. Or if there's something specific going through Parliament, like when it was the agriculture bill, then I got lots of emails from constituents then. You're on mute, Robbie.
Sorry, Alex, how about you and your experiences of engaging?
Yeah, I mean, as a Green politician, obviously it's something that's come up daily for me. But I would say that there's been a lot more noise about it recently. I've been a politician elected for 11 years and involved in politics for 20 years. And, you know, at the beginning, there wasn't the same concern as there is now. And I think actually very recently, so, you know, since the 2018 intergovernmental panel on climate change report, which basically gave us just 10 years to get our house in order to mitigate the worst effects of the climate crisis. I think climate change has gone up on everyone's list of priorities, but especially, I would say, amongst young people. And it's obvious why, really, because it's young people who will be living with the consequences of our political decisions today. And I think that's why we've seen over the last couple of years the rise of Fridays for the Future, the climate strikers, Greta Thunberg and so forth, which I find really inspiring. But it's also been great to witness the intergenerational consensus behind the climate crisis, including greats like, you know, David Attenborough and the XR movement too. And I think this has all happened really and come to a climax just over the last kind of year and a half or 2 years. Definitely I've seen a peak in activism and people really wanting to contact me about climate change.
Brilliant. And Alexander?
Hello there, and thank you for having me. I'm probably a rarity, both in this panel and in the Conservative Party, because I actually live and breathe climate change. I actually worked for the WWF, the World Wildlife Fund, exactly on climate change. So despite being a Conservative, the last sort of 5-6 years of my career before Parliament was on this very issue. So it's something I feel very passionate about. But I also, I feel it's very, not just something we should get worried about, but there's an exciting opportunity to build back better and actually get things on better. And in fact, I had an article in City AM newspaper this morning exactly on that. So going on to the question about, is it something that comes up often? Yes, I live and breathe it. It's something I talk with my colleagues about. The Conservative Environment Network in Parliament is very, very big, very powerful, very important, rightly so. And it is frequently mentioned by young people, but it's also mentioned not just by young people, but to, I say, older people, for want of a better word. Both in the fact they want to live something better for their children, they want a green environment, but also in my part of the world, from Rother Valley, it's a former mining area, coal mining, heavy industry. People have seen the environmental damage it's done to the landscape, and they really want a better, greener future. On top of that, they also see the economic benefits of going towards that, and that is through jobs. Because in the past, there were a lot of coal mining jobs, heavy industry. That's meaning that those closed now, and want to move to the green jobs, the renewable, the green finance. So actually, this is a topic which is cross-generational and does and affects everybody in a positive way, I'd say, by going back greener and better.
Thank you for that answer. So it sounds like there's a lot of engagement, something that's coming up more recently in the sort of past few years, and the way that people are engaging is different, and that's all very interesting. So then, in the engagements that you've been having with constituents or members of the wider, general public, is there any sort of times that stand out to you that you think, wow, that was a really, really sort of effective engagement that person communicated their issue of climate action to me? And is there any tips that you might give to the people on this call, particularly for people that might be attending the Time Is Now virtual mass lobby for Parliament tomorrow? Nadia, I know that you said that you're going to be meeting your constituents there. So it'd be interesting to know if, Alex, you've got anything going on tomorrow, and Alexander equally. So Alex, sorry, I keep calling you Alexandra. Alex, if we begin with you answering that question first, then that would be brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, some of the most politically engaged young people that I've come across have actually been under the voting age and under 18. And some of the biggest impacts that I've had from their engagement have been from very young people. In fact, the thing that stands out for me the most is I got about 60 hand-drawn cards about the climate crisis from kids in primary schools. As mayor of Brighton and Hove, and I've kept them all. It's that I think when people go to that sort of effort and their children, that really is something that stays with you for a while. And in fact, a 14-year-old from Brighton wrote the foreword to a report that I published on the Green New Deal last year. So it was good to hear Alexander's comments about green jobs, and I hope that he will be supporting the Green New Deal bill, as I hope it progresses through Parliament later this year. But I think we've also got a whole host of mainly female young role models that we can look at now and across the years. So we've seen people like, I've mentioned Greta Thunberg and Malala Yousafzai, and I think they're just incredible people. If you've got a chance to read either of their books, I would say go ahead and do that. And I think at the moment, with COVID-19, obviously it strains our activities in some important respects, but it shouldn't make young people feel powerless. On the contrary, I think the interlocking crisis the UK is experiencing at the moment is revealing just how vulnerable the current system is, and just how powerful young people themselves can be. And I think there's a whole host of actions that they can get involved with online, as you've mentioned, taking part in those sorts of coordinated actions to put pressure on decision makers. I think education is key though as well. And I remember myself as a young person at the age of about 14 becoming very politically active and educating myself and my friends so that we understood the world around us, because I think that's really important in order to change it. And there are lots of adults who don't fully understand the world around them, and maybe that's why they don't feel that they can take part and have a voice in changing it as well. And I will just finally plug the Young Greens political programme, because they have a programme of political education at the moment, which is very interesting. They have used and capitalised upon this time in lockdown to explain, some of the difficulties and challenges and opportunities that are ahead of us. They have a book club and exclusive online trainings to skill up to build power. So I would just direct people to those sorts of things as well.
Brilliant, thank you for that. Alexander?
Yes, so you mentioned the lobby tomorrow. Of course, I'm taking part. Many constituents are doing it, so looking forward to it. But I'm also taking part in the Green Alliance, which is a collection of green charities. One of their media roundups to promote this. It's something I feel very passionate about. Now, I'm going to do two things. You said an example. I'm going to give you a sort of positive example and a negative example. So the positive example of effective lobby for me was in my constituency, Rother Valley, with their plans to do fracking in the south of their constituency down near sort of Hart Hill Way. And I was taken on a drive around by constituents to show the sites. And what really struck me is on one field, literally the middle of the road, one field, they had this site earmarked for fracking. And on the other side of the road, same field, there are 3 wind turbines. And you couldn't get to me a more stark contrast between the past and the future. The wind turbines, which are going on there with lots of nice green power, and the dirty fracking, which they want to do in the same area. Same area we can do wind turbines. And to me, that's like such a stark contrast between two alternative fuels. Clearly, you can put fracking in both fields. You can do wind turbines in both fields, and that sort of contrast is very interesting. And that was really brought home to me why we really should go more into green areas in our local areas. But a negative example, and I think what will put people off from engaging, and I would say is Extinction Rebellion. There's a lot of conservatives, green conservatives, those who care about the environment. But when you have actions of people who, you know, blockade offices, blockade hospitals as they did, vandalize things, that does the green cause no good whatsoever, and actually has a massive negative effect. It actually scares off a lot of soft green conservatives who are naturally sort of green and quite sympathetic. But when they see often a bunch of violent people doing mass protests, mass strikes, that scares people. That says, well, these aren't rational people. These aren't people to engage with. It's fundamental. Going green is good for everyone. It's good for the environment, it's good for business, it's good for our lives. And we want to promote a positive message rather than this sort of doom and gloom, negative scaremongering, which just turns people off. And I think that is the worst thing that the climate groups, the green groups can do. And it's this relentless negativity. It's a positive reason to go green, a positive reason for our environment, and we should be upbeat about it.
Thank you for that, Alexander. Nadia, if I come to you next, that's all right. Oh, Nadia, you're on mute. We've both made the same mistake.
Massive boomer energy. It's not a Zoom call unless there's someone talking on mute, is it? I've had some really positive engagements with constituents. Lots of people who have contacted me on the climate strikes in particular. I've found that, obviously before lockdown, to be a very constructive space for us to talk, not just about what's happening through Parliament, but also about what we can be doing in our communities to combat climate breakdown and to work together in things like mutual aid groups. We've got lots of exciting initiatives happening in Nottingham like that. So we've got a publicly owned energy company here. We've got excellent publicly owned bus service as well. I've found activist groups like XR and the younger generation in particular to be a real driving force behind this. I mean, I've been part of the climate movement myself, and the other thing that I've found to be really useful is conversations with the trade unions. So I've had a lot of conversations with the FBU about a Green New Deal, and Alex, I'm really looking forward to supporting the Green New Deal bill when it comes through Parliament. It was one of the things that I've been lobbying for within the Labour Party, and I worked with the FBU on a Green New Deal policy which looks at the climate crisis in the context of jobs and building a just transition, and how not just climate laws, but also things like workers' laws are impacting the environment. So things like restrictive anti-trade union laws. And that was highlighted really well in Nottingham, where we had delivery riders and taxi drivers striking together over this new metric that Deliveroo had introduced, which gave priority to motorised vehicles and basically penalised delivery riders, but also really damaged the environment. And that was a very powerful thing that was done, but wouldn't have been possible for people to do if they were employers. So that's just one area where we can look more holistically at reforming workers' rights and improving workers' rights in order to tackle climate breakdown.
Brilliant. Thank you all for them contributions. And I just wanted to pick up on a point that Alex mentioned about the most inspiring engagement that she'd had was with somebody below the voting age, which brings me to my next question. So in my role as Schools and Youth Outreach Officer at Hope for the Future, I have the luxury of engaging with lots of different sort of inspiring young people around the country, many of whom, as Alex rightly pointed out, are under the voting age. So in your sort of capacity as elected representatives, how do you see the role of young people in political engagement that are below the legal voting age, and how can young people who aren't able to vote influence action on climate change? So if for this one, Alexander, we go to you first, followed by Nadia, followed by Alex.
Yeah, so just basic role as an MP, first of all, is you represent everyone who lives in your area, all your constituents, regardless of whether they can vote for you, can vote, or even you want to vote for you. So in Rother Valley, there's 76,000 electors, people who can vote, and there's about 98,000 people, so that's a mixture of people who can't vote for various reasons or underage. So you represent everyone, regardless of who it is. So I'm sure, like Nadia, anyone who comes to me is treated in the same way, regardless of whether they can vote or can't vote, as long as they live in the area. So everyone is equal footing. And I think that's quite important, especially for young people to realise that you're actually not treated any differently, especially not by me, whether you're a young person, an old person, a person who votes for me, who doesn't vote for me, you're all treated the same level and get the same response. So don't be scared about approaching your MP for a start. That's the most important thing, because you will generally get treated as the same. But for me, it's very inspiring speaking to lots of young people, especially when I go to the various schools around my constituency, because young people are the future, and they often see things in a slightly different way. I'd say more ideological way, less more sort of idealistic way, but that's no bad thing. They're not sort of beaten down by the world we're in and the sort of tax-paying adults. But from that, you can get some really good ideas. I mean, that's quite inspiring. But on top of that, it's also about seeing where young people want to go, because part of the job of MP is planning for the future. What sort of society, what sort of country do we want to be? Not just now, not just even day-to-day, but in 5 years, 10 years, 30 years' time. So the conversations I had with children, especially like, what sort of jobs do you want? I mean, I don't have ever had a conversation with a young person who wants to go and work for big oil and gas companies. Not a single person. Yeah, I have had conversations with young people who are interested in renewable energy or battery technology or electric vehicles. So they already are deciding on their future. So we as politicians have to almost help plan for that. So right, if we've got a lot of people who want to get involved in these technology, let's actually make sure there's jobs in that, and let's encourage people. And that's part of the way of having that conversation, which I think is very important, because we want to make sure that young people have as much say, but also have a say in their future, because we have to plan for the future, not just today. So do get in contact with your MP, do share your ideas, don't be intimidated. Yes, some of the MPs' ways of doing things are slightly archaic, whether it's by letters or emails rather than various media, potentially, but do get in contact. And if you can't do it yourself, I'll speak to an adult or a teacher or guardian who can write in or get contact. And I think the majority of MPs would be very happy wanting to get engaged. MPs want to go to school, they want to hear ideas, they want to understand what the next and the future generations are thinking about these sort of issues.
Brilliant, thank you so much. So Nadia, if we move to you next, and then we'll finish with Alex.
I'd echo what Alexander said about the role of a constituency MP. We're here not just for people over the age of 18, but everybody, no matter your age, your immigration status, we're here as the voice for all of our constituents. I think the first thing to say is that 16 and 17-year-olds absolutely should have the vote, and I'll be working with people across the House to campaign for that. Some of the brightest, most switched on people I've met have been under the age of 18. I'd say absolutely young people are the future, but we're also the present. And I think that's what the climate movement has really shown, is that it's been young people like Greta Thunberg, like the many thousands of young people across the country and across the world whose names we don't know, but who have brought legislators around to a new way of thinking when it comes to climate. So I'd say always contact me. I'm happy to host young people in Parliament. I've hosted climate strikers in Parliament already and held a Westminster Hall debate on climate justice. One of the things that I'm also working on is a bill with Teach the Future, led by young people, on why we should have climate education as compulsory in schools. So please, if you'd like to be involved in that, just drop me an email and I'd be very happy to talk. And if you're not already involved in a movement in your area, then I can help put you in touch with people who are. One of the other things to say is that it's really important that young people feel as though they're having their voices heard. And if anyone, you know, is thinking of standing for a position or would like to find out more about the way that Parliament works, then I'm really happy to speak to you.
Brilliant. Alex, if we finish with you, that would be great.
Yeah. I mean, concretely right now, there are a few things that young people can get involved with. There's a cross-party policy making or presenting process, and it's called Reset-UK, and it's a quick survey, and it means that young people and people's ideas can feed into some policies that cross-party MPs will bring forward in the autumn. So I think that's a nice concrete thing to go ahead with. I mean, I agree with Nadia, we need votes at 16. There may even be, you know, a debate around votes before 16, actually, given just how engaged and educated very many of our young people are. And I'm really proud to be part of a party that, you know, that's been a cornerstone of our offer for decades now. And if you look at places like Scotland, where recently, you know, they've had a referendum where people aged 16 could vote in that referendum, people who were still at school. And a lot of the school curriculum and the education was all kind of geared around supporting that. And I think you see a higher level of engagement there in Scotland, thanks to that, and a higher level of participation of young people as well in elections. And that's the sort of trajectory that we need to go on here in the UK. Like very many things, England is far behind Scotland and in some degrees Wales. And I'll just come on to Wales now, because there's the Wellbeing for Future Generations Act in Wales. It has actually been made an act there, and they have a commissioner who looks at the future well-being of people who haven't even been born yet. You know, what's life going to be like, not just for young people now, but for people who haven't been born in 2040, 2050 and 2060. And I think it's a huge challenge for Westminster to think beyond the 5-year election cycles that are imposed upon them. And I sort of get that. But at the same point, I really feel that that's another bill that young people can get involved with and lobby their MPs. It's currently in the House of Lords. And it will make its way over to the House of Commons. So that's the Wellbeing for Future Generations bill. And hopefully it will do what it says on the tin.
Brilliant. Thank you again for them really, really interesting contributions. And some of you have touched on this point of engagement and engaging with your MPs and stuff. And so that brings me to my next question, which is research by Hansard has shown that only around 8% of 18 to 24-year-olds have actually contacted their MP. And the workshops that we deliver at Hope for the Future, especially to young people, a large amount of time in them workshops is actually spent convincing people to engage with their MPs and supporting them in that process. So I think it would be quite interesting for the people listening today to know that before the three of you entered public life and became politicians, did you ever contact your local MP, your local councillors, and yeah, why is it sort of important for people, especially young people, to do that? So Nadia, if we go to you first, and then Alex, and then Alexander.
I have a few times before I was elected. The thing that really made me politicised and angered me to get involved in politics was the bedroom tax. And I contacted my MP, Lillian Greenwood, who's now a colleague of mine, and asked her about that, and she was very responsive. I'd say that when people are contacting their MPs, it's important to remember that 99% of the time, MPs will vote with the party line. So what's really important is to influence a party's policy, and you can only do that by joining a political party. So if you're a Conservative, then I'd join the Conservative Party and make sure that they prioritise migrants' rights and a Green New Deal, etc. Ditto if you're a Labour supporter, join. and be part of forming that policy.
Brilliant, thank you for that. Alex, if
yeah, I mean, I similarly, I've been, you know, politically active from quite a young age. And I joined the Labour Party actually when I was 16. I'm from Liverpool originally, so Louise Ellman was my MP for Riverside. And I did contact her because I was disgusted by the war in Iraq, essentially. And I marched down to London, you know, in London with a million other people when I was about 17. And I just thought, I can't be a card-carrying Labour member. If that's what the Labour Party are going to do. And that's why I joined the Green Party. It was actually to do with more kind of human rights and civil liberties, because their offer on that is really very good, and not so much on the environment, although that obviously was very important. But I would just challenge Nadia on being a member of a political party. Of course, that's a really good way of support of you know, developing policy and so forth, but it isn't the only way. You can be a member of a trade union and do it, for example, and young people can join and support trade unions. And the Green New Deal activists, some of whom are from Brighton, are not members of the Labour Party yet. They spoke at Labour Party conference and played a significant role in ensuring that, you know, a Green New Deal, you call it something else, I've forgotten what it's called now within the Labour Party, but essentially the Green New Deal was taken forward and became one of their policies. So I think there are lots of different avenues for young people to choose, and if they don't feel ready to join a political party straight away, and they'd like to kind of find their feet first, they can definitely get involved without being a full-blown member first.
thank you for that, Alex. Alexander?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of echo what Nadia was saying. It is important to get involved. I mean, you don't necessarily have to join a party. I can't remember when I joined the Conservative Party officially. It must have been when I was at university, but I was involved earlier, so do get involved. All parties will happily take your money and also take your ability to leaflet or ring people up, so do that. But I do agree with Nadia saying that it's a good way of getting involved, shaping policy, understanding, but also discovering who you are, in the sense that you may think you're a Conservative member or a Labour member or Green member or UKIP, Brexit Party, but the only way you actually know that is when you start going on to meetings, speaking to other like-minded members, because you might think, oh, I'm a Conservative, but actually you're more sort of a Liberal Democrat, or if you're sort of Labour, actually you're more Green. So it's quite a good way of discovering who you are about yourself. But also, I got involved at a young age, so I had dealings with my local MPs, but not sort of asking them to do stuff, because most of my life I've lived under Labour MPs, unfortunately. But there's a brief moment where I was under Conservatives, and now I'm again, so that's great. But young people can get involved in many ways and feed in. So I'd say it's easy to email an MP, easier than ever than writing a letter. Email an MP, you can get issues raised. And also, MPs, regardless of your persuasion, want to help out the area and want to know more about the area. So if you raise an issue with your MP that is especially relevant to the area, whether it's jobs or business or a great community centre or something, generally the MP will be interested and wants to hear that. So, like, you know, I've come up with various ideas, such as a PPE factory in Thurcroft after Corona and stuff, because of people getting in contact with me. So don't be scared. Do contact your MP. Help them. As I always say, I'm only as good as people tell me. There's 76,000 electors, 100,000 people roughly in Rother Valley. I can't know what everyone's thinking unless people tell me. So if you're a young person and you want to help change policy, do let your MP know. Do show them the strength you're feeling. Get your friends and family to contact your MP as well.
Thank you for that. That was really, really helpful contributions from you all. So just quickly then, before I do pass over to George for the wider sort of Q&A from the audience, and I can see that there's quite a few already been submitted, and if you've not already, please do submit some questions and do vote for them. As you'll probably all be aware, you've touched on the Time Is Now lobby, things like that happening tomorrow. There has been some momentum sort of building over the past few weeks. Specifically, the Climate Assembly UK came out showing that there's this overwhelming public support for not returning to business as usual and moving towards a greener, fairer, more sustainable society, and reaching this net zero target. So is there anything that the three of you are doing right now specifically to ensure that we reach that sort of future? And is there anything that you'd like to add to the audience of what they can do to help us get there? Yeah, sorry, Alex, if we go to you. I was just going to, yeah, Alex, if we go to you first, and then Alexander, then Nadia.
Well, as I mentioned, there are two bills going through Parliament just now. So there's the Green New Deal bill, which essentially invests a large sum of money into renewable energies, energy efficiency measures, but not solely on typical green jobs, if you like, because we need jobs for the future that are low carbon, like carers and investing money in the NHS and so forth. Now that Green New Deal bill, I think later in the autumn, there's a date where it'll sort of commence through the House of Commons, and that's something that I'm supporting. Caroline Lucas, it's kind of her baby, since she wrote a whole thesis about it in 2009, and now it may become reality, hopefully. And I think the Conservatives have a lot to gain from it, because I think now they'll find it difficult to, given the coronavirus, to deliver upon some of their promises around jobs and the economy if they don't do an avenue such as this. So I think that it is ripe picking for this government, believe it or not. And there's also the Wellbeing for Future Generations bill, which I've already spoken about. That's currently in the House of Lords with the big issue founder, who's a crossbencher, Lord John Bird. And that is another bill, excuse me, that I'm going to be supporting, and seeing how best we can get that through made into legislation. Or if we can't get it made into legislation, at least tack elements on to any sort of Build Back Better initiative by the government themselves.
Brilliant, thank you for that, Alex. Alexander?
Well, yeah, I sort of alluded to this before when I said the Conservative Environment Network of MPs is one of the most powerful lobbies in the Conservative Party. And the most important thing is making sure our voices are being constantly heard. So I did a piece, as I did today, in City AM. There's loads of us putting articles on Conservative Home, writing articles for newspapers, and keeping pressure on the government to make sure that we do this. And this Conservative government is probably the greenest government that we have ever had. I mean, look at the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. His father is Stanley, is a huge environmentalist. His partner, Carrie, is a huge marine expert. So there is that pressure from his own personal family on him to do green, let alone from Conservative MPs like myself. And the government made it perfectly clear that post-COVID, we need to get our economy back going, but we can't go back to the way things were. We need this green recovery. And that's why I keep saying about the positive aspects of it, because by putting pressure on the government, create those new jobs, those green jobs, decarbonising everything, we can do things, we can do things better. But on top of this, let's be honest, the world is going to go low carbon and then net carbon zero in the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years. That is the direction of travel. I would say the arguments over climate change have been won, minus a few sort of refuseniks. But generally, the conversation has been won. What we want to do is be on the front foot and be basically the first country to use the technology and the skills to be on that, whether it's through battery technology, whether it's through hydrogen, with aspects like that we really need to steal an advantage and actually be a world leader when it comes to this new green way of living.
Brilliant. And finally, Nadia?
There are a few things that I'm working on in Parliament. So I'm a member of the Environmental Audit Select Committee, which is essentially responsible for making sure that the government is meeting its obligations, its environmental obligations. So one of the things that we're talking about is our economic recovery after COVID and how that is connected to a green recovery, and why it's so important for us to resist any attempt to be investing in dirty industry and dirty energy in order to get the economy back on its feet. So one of the ways in which this could be done is like what France are doing, with attaching conditionalities on climate to bailouts. I think that's really, really important. And it's particularly important because it's a lesson that we can learn from 2008, and a lesson that we can learn from this crisis as well, is that we can't be bailing out companies and then allowing them to lay off their workers, to damage workers' rights, or to damage our planet. So this is an opportune moment for doing that. One of the things that we raised in the EAC was the fact that even after the Paris Agreement, the government is still spending billions on fossil fuels overseas. Now, that needs to stop, and that's something that I hope that we can all work together on to make sure ends. On a Green New Deal, I completely agree that we need to decarbonise the economy, and that's throughout every sector of the economy. But it's also not just about decarbonising, it's about things like rewilding and agroecology. So I sat on the Agriculture Bill Committee, where we tried to get through lots of amendments to the Agriculture Bill, to put it briefly, mainly to protect environmental rights, to protect animal rights, and also to put duties on the government rather than just rights. Unfortunately, all of those got voted down, but it's something that we'll still keep pushing to do. There is, of course, the Teach the Future bill that I'm working on, but then more broadly, after COVID, I think an important conversation for us to have is not just how much money is spent, because and I'm relieved that the Conservatives are spending more than they ever thought they would. And some of that is thanks to lobbying by trade unions and by the opposition and by the public too. But also in whose hands that power is, because it's not enough just to spend money. We've also got to democratise the economy and to democratise industry so that it's not just investment, but people have power after this.
Brilliant. Well, thank you all so much for that. I'm now going to pass over to George, my colleague, who is going to take you through the audience Q&A. So yeah, George, do you have any questions for us? I'm sure there's lots.
Yeah, we've had loads of amazing questions. Thanks so much to our speakers for joining us today. So we had quite a lot of questions touching on the topic of education. So whether that be kind of information literacy, scientific education, and whether climate change should be taught in schools. So just to start off, do you believe climate education for all young people is a priority in regards to tackling the climate crisis? So should we start with Alex and then go to Nadia and Alexander?
Well, in Brighton, we have a woman who was one of the first who's been qualified to teach climate change in primary schools, actually, and that's working really well. Caroline Lucas obviously has been pushing for a long time for there to be climate education in schools from an early age onwards. And so obviously it's something that we would like to support. It's really important for young people to understand the world that they live in, to understand the world around them so that they can best interact with it. And climate change is going to be one of the biggest challenges of the generation, of our generation and the generations in the future. So of course it should be staple to any curriculum. I'm not sure whether under this government that will happen. And I think we will have to try and get rid of the Tories, I would have thought, in order for those sorts of radical policies and things like votes at 16 and so forth. And I think the two go hand in hand, as we've seen, as I mentioned earlier, in Scotland with the referendum. You know, when there are votes at 16, what we see is when kids are still in school and young people are still in school, then they're able to be given extra information to learn about it, you know, to go away, to reflect, to come back, and have all those very important discussions. I think that's the only way forward, but I think it needs to be done from a really early age. You know, as soon as kids are in school, they can start to learn about climate change, and it doesn't have to be in a terrifying way. As Alexander said, there are some opportunities, and you know, we would like to see those opportunities for young people, and for young people especially to have jobs in the future. And I know that a lot of young people are very excited about having a hand in tackling the climate crisis.
Brilliant, thank you. And just to Nadia now.
Yeah, this is absolutely crucial. We should have climate education in schools, woven through every subject, and also as part of PSH. Well, it was PSHE when I was at school, and I think that should start from from age 0. I think it's really important that people from across the house work on this together. And Alexandra, I hope that we can work on this together, because I'm genuinely keen for people across the house to be supporting this. And I think it also prompts that intergenerational learning, which is so important. And that's why I think, yes, it's important for it to be on the curriculum, but also we need adults and older people to be educated about this. And that's another area in which it's so important for trade union laws to be repealed, so that trade unions can have a role in doing that in workplaces, or for there to be some other suggestion for that to happen in workplaces. Trade unions seem to be the obvious solution to me.
I'm a bit confused by the question, because I may be the oldest person on this call, I'm 32, but I studied climate change at school. I studied it 15, 20 years ago. It was a big issue then, it still is a bigger issue now. I studied in geography, I studied in science, so I do think children do understand the issues of climate change. As I said, I think the argument's moved on. I think we need to stop talking about climate change and look at the future. That argument's been won. There's very few people out there who are arguing against it. But what we need is saying, right, we need a low carbon future, a zero carbon future. What are the technologies? What can we do to get there? Rather than being backward looking, we need to look forward. And as I was saying, we can't keep sort of navel gazing. This argument's won. Stop wasting our time. We've got to move forward in a positive way. And that's what we should be talking to children about what we can do to make things better, what we can do to make our water cleaner, our air cleaner, our trees greener. That is what we need to do. We understand the argument's been won about climate change. There's very few people who are upsetting that. The education establishment is with us, the political establishment is with us. Let's take that great goodwill opportunity to drive forward and get that new brighter future. And that is what we should be concentrating on at schools, looking at the future, not looking at what arguments have already been won.
Oh, that's really interesting. Range of opinions from everyone. And kind of moving in the direction of Alexander's answer, actually, for kind of the more kind of infrastructure-based things that people are concerned about going forward. We had a very highly voted question from the audience of that young people are more likely than any other demographics to be renting. So how can we make sure that privately rented homes live up to high energy efficiency standards? So we'll go in the same order. I'll start with Alex.
Well, I mean, I think it's not just privately rented homes. I think, you know, there are also council homes, there's housing association homes. It's across the board where, you know, government needs to step in essentially to ensure that all older buildings are properly insulated, you know, and that aren't leaking money through the windows, and people aren't on you know, gas meters where they're having to really think about, you know, every penny, you know, whether they'll be able to pay for their food or heat their homes and so forth. But this needs to be thought about across the board. And, you know, there's retrofitting, which that is essentially, but there's also new builds. And I think that what we should be doing is there should be a huge amount of investment made to have, you know, council properties that aren't just this never-ending right to buy escalator, which leaves councils with no social housing for people in need and a huge homelessness problem. I think, you know, right to buy can only work when council housing is then replenished and replaced every single time. And we here in Brighton and Hove, we have done a huge retrofit for existing council housing, but for those new builds, you know, whatever those new builds are, whether they're private, council, housing association, they need to be taking on, you know, radical models, things that people consider as radical, such as Dutch models, where there's a thing called passive house, where a house, you know, everything about it, the position of the house, its windows aspect, everything about it means that it is as efficient as possible. And those people that live in those houses pay hardly any heating bills. They've got nice and warm houses in the winter, cool houses in the summer. Their well-being and their happiness is improved through that. I mean, it seems like an obvious solution to another crisis that we have at the moment, which is one of health and well-being. And housing is absolutely fundamental. There needs to be a step change, and a fast step change in how we deliver that right now and going forward.
Thank you. And Nadia?
I agree with every word that Alex has said. We need to retrofit existing houses. We need a mass programme of building green, renewable, sustainable council homes. And not just that, but private companies building houses need to have very strict climate obligations on them. We need to crack down generally on rogue landlords, because this all feeds part of the same problem. And I think we either need to scrap right to buy, that would be my preference, or we need to replace council homes at the same rate as they're being sold off, which essentially, you know, amounts to the same thing.
Alex?
Well, I would agree with everything Alex and Nadia said, apart from right to buy, which I think is a great policy, just unfortunately poorly employed by mostly on Labour councils. But on the actual issue of energy, I think it's very important. We need to build homes for the future. Council homes or private homes need to build the future. I mean, to me, it's absurd that we are building homes which are not energy efficient at the moment. We are building homes with driveways, but they're not automatically given electric charging points. To me, it's madness. We're building homes where there's no space for batteries. Batteries in homes are going to be one of the next big things in the next 5-10 years. So basically, you have solar panels on your roof or turbine. You can take energy from the sun or the wind, store it in the battery, and then use it in your home. That is the future. That's what we should be doing. It's madness that we are putting into conventional gas boilers. We're not looking at like sort of the Bosch hydrogen boilers and trying to restore it that way. So to me, we are building, frankly, the wrong homes at the moment, both council or private sector. And we need a radical rethink of how we actually build our homes, and then we can deal with the issues of retrofitting. But let's be honest, energy efficiency for a lot of council homes and private rented homes is one of the issues, but it's not the only issue. There's so many homes in this country that are not fit for purpose, that we need a radical overhaul of what we do and look at every aspect, not just energy efficiency, but just where we build our homes and how we make homes that are safe and warm and comfortable for everyone.
Thank you. And kind of, we touched, I think, a lot in those answers on fuel poverty. And we had a pre-submitted question on Eventbrite, which was how we can make sure that the fight against climate change supports and includes those most marginalised in society. As we know, there are lots of kind of intersections between these issues. So yeah, I'll go in the same order again and start with Alex.
Climate justice has to happen. And when I talk about climate justice, it's not just about people in this country, but it's also about the global south, you know, who are bearing the brunt of the climate crisis right now because of our countries in the global north. And so I think it's a broad reaching answer, really, and it's not just looking at this country, but we do need to take everyone with us. People who are in the fossil fuel industries, in the aviation industry, in all of those kind of now what seems archaic industries, actually, redundant industries, and we move those people over to other jobs, good, well-paid, secure jobs for life, where people can either be given the money to train up, so they get train up onto something else and use the skills that they've learned, but you know, in a slightly different energy field, or they're given you know, a decent retirement and can retire in dignity. I think that's the only way we can deal with it in this country. With other countries, there are various avenues, but I think reparations is one avenue that we can seriously need to consider.
Thank you. And just on to Nadia.
Fuel poverty is a huge issue in my constituency and in every constituency that has high poverty rates. I think that the government needs to be doing much, much more on this. We need a wholesale investment in renewable and affordable energies. One way of doing this, because I think it's also important that energy production is democratised, is having local publicly owned energy companies, but for these to be funded properly by the government, because as it stands, initiatives like that are really struggling. I think that cooperatives have a big role to play here as well. And I think that this is also all part of the problem of low pay, of the gig economy and precarious work. With regards to climate justice, this is really important, and this is why it's so dangerous that the Department for International Development is being scrapped as a department, because we need to be thinking about not just the way in which climate change impacts people in this country, but also how the impacts of climate change are felt most strongly by the most vulnerable, particularly those in the global south. And we can't be sort of exporting our emissions to the global south and sort of outsourcing the burden.
And just on to add,
yeah, fuel poverty is incredibly important. We talked about energy efficiency of homes, that's great, but we're talking about poverty generally, I'd say. And that is why, like in my community up in Rother Valley, we're known as like a left behind community. We lost jobs after the mines closed. Devastating communities. So what we want is new jobs, green jobs. That will push people forward. That will level up. And that is why I keep going back to my theme, which is dealing with climate change is a positive thing. It's not doom and gloom. There are jobs. There are ways of making people have warmer homes, energy efficient homes. It's a win-win for everyone, and that's why we all need to embrace it. We don't need to worry about, you know, whatever climate justice might be or might not be. We want jobs. We want investment in the economy. We want low carbon. Let's talk realistic. Well, that's how to convince people. Talk about things that matter, you know, the pound in the pocket. And that is how a green economy can get that there. And we can deal with issues like poverty and fuel poverty through a green economy.
I think a really important point to make is that none of these things are mutually exclusive. We can have all of this. We can have 1 million green jobs, as Labour's manifesto promised in 2019. We can have a just economy as well that doesn't outsource the worst impacts of climate change to those who have done the least to deserve it and are least able to mitigate it.
I'll just move on to the final question. We are a little bit tight on time, but please everyone stick with us. This will be the final question. And thank you all for your brilliant answers. So earlier we touched on, and we have throughout the webinar touched on kind of the activities of XR and the youth climate strikers. So we had a quite highly voted question, which was, would you agree that the positive effects stemming from XR's direct action, such as elevating the status and coverage of the climate emergency, outweigh any negative impact about the reputation of climate activists? Alexander touched on the perception of them, for instance, among some conservatives. So we could go with the same order, Alex, Nadia, and then Alexander.
I mean, as I understand it, XR has a very devolved structure, which then allows for, I mean, there are positives and negatives for that, I guess. But one of the negatives is that it allows for people to just go and organise on their own and use XR's name in doing so. I've broadly been very supportive of XR, and I think, you know, most of their tactics have been well placed because they've been against government, against financial institutions, and those sorts of things. I did criticise them, however, when they targeted a tube in London. I don't know whether you remember it. It was last year, I think, and it was a largely working class, very multicultural area of London where people are getting the tube, which is public transport, you know, which is the right thing to be doing. They're not getting in their cars. They don't have cars, many of them. And so I think that sometimes, and that's one example, you know, it hasn't been well placed or well targeted, but the vast majority of XR's action, I think, has been amazing. It's been peaceful. It's been, you know, inspiring. You've seen lots of different types of people involved from different walks of life and different generations. And it's been well targeted at government and financial institutions, where I think that, you know, that's where, and big polluters like airports and so on. And when they do actions like that, they have my whole support.
And Nadia?
I agree entirely with Alex, and I think it's indefensible that XR has been characterised as a terrorist organisation, you know, alongside some of the worst far-right groups and extremist groups. I think, you know, we've got to thank the activists, the youth strikers, all of the people who have helped put this so firmly on the agenda and made it impossible for parliamentarians to row back.
I couldn't disagree more. I think Extinction Rebellion have been the worst thing for the climate movement for years. Because let's be honest, the only people who they appeal to are people who are already on board. I don't want to talk to people on board. I want to talk to people who are sort of, you know, wavering about how to invest in the future. I want to talk to people who are on message. I want to try and convert the sinners. And this just gets people's backs up. It's very good to feel good and say, yes, we blockaded a road. Yes, we tore up some turf outside a college, and, you know, appeal and pat ourselves on the back by having some sort of camp out in the middle of London. But does that change a single person who's wavering to your side of you? Does it? Oh my God, I'm going to now invest in green jobs because somebody has blockaded my road. No, it just puts people's backs up. We need to speak to people in a positive way rather than just talking to ourselves. And that, to me, is the biggest problem often with the green movement. We're too busy talking to each other, too busy talking to people who are on the same wavelength, and not busy enough going out there talking the language of business, the language of jobs, the language of future, that can actually convince more and more people to our side. And that's why I think Extinction Rebellion has been a distraction and turned more people off than it's brought supporters in. Because for me, it's all about getting more people on side. So they have been a disaster for the climate movement.
A bombshell to finish on. Thank you so much for all our brilliant questions from our attendees and for our speakers for taking so much time to answer. I'll just pass back to Robbie, who I think has got some remarks to wrap us up today.
Yeah, so equally, I'd like to say a big thank you to the three of you for giving up the time to come and speak to us today. It's been really, really interesting to hear all your different perspectives on different questions. And then also, thank you so much for everybody that signed up, all the people that have joined live. So yeah, thank you so much. I do just want to mention a little bit of a plug. Tomorrow, we're going to be continuing with this mini webinar series with climate researcher Clover Hogan. We're going to be discussing all things eco-anxiety and how to turn sort of anxiety into agency and that sort of thing. And then finally, if you'd like to get in touch with Hope for the Future to find out more about our work, or want support in contacting your elected representatives, then please do get in touch. And then just one last thing, please do fill out the feedback form which will appear after you exit the session, because it's really, really helpful for us and the reports that we write for improving our sort of events. So yeah, many thanks again, and I hope to see you all soon.